We are on Dalet Amud Base, 14b, and we're talking about when and where the lechi, the vertical post, would be valid at the opening of the mavli. So up until now, we've talked about the opening of the mavli. What happens if the vertical post is not exactly at the opening, but somewhere in the middle of the alleyway? So let's say it's a 300-foot alleyway, and you put it at 100 feet in from the opening. So this is about halfway on the page, 3-4 lines after the Mishnah. Tana, we learned. If somebody made a lechi, but he did it in the middle of the mavli, all he has is he can carry within the space that's inward from the lechi, but not beyond that lechi. So the 100 feet from the opening until the lechi, he may not carry, but you may carry within the space from where the lechi is until the end of the alleyway, the inner side of the alleyway. And we said, Pshita, of course, that's the only place that you have the demarcation and the reminder. Ella ema yesh lachatzimah. So what it means is not only that it actually works. Of course, that you can't carry beyond there, but it even inside that alleyway, I may have thought you can't carry, and that's why it's saying you may carry inside the lechi. That seems obvious too. Someone says, no, actually, I may have thought you can't. Maybe if you allow somebody to carry in the inner 200 feet, they may end up carrying in 100 feet beyond the lechi as well to the opening. Kamash Malan. That's why it says that a half a lechi and a half a alleyway anywhere in the middle would also be valid. Amar Rava said halacha. He made a lechi, but the lechi was either 3 tefachim off the ground. It wasn't on the ground. It's hanging somewhere in the air, or it's 3 tefachim, about 9-10 inches away from the wall. So it's freestanding in the middle. It doesn't count. And even though that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said that 3 tefachim is still loved, that up to 4 tefachim is how far you get loved, which we said was that a substance would consider to be closed, an area would be closed if the material is within that space. That's only above or at the side. But below, since this is going to be a machitza, a wall that gedim boikimba, that goats, kids can get through, and so that doesn't count as a valid wall, and therefore it's going to even though that usually loved Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is going to hold is going to be 4 tefachim, but 3 tefachim from beneath it is going to be a wall that's too high up, and it won't count as a valid lechi. Our Mishnah had said that a lechi has no minimum width, and it has a 10 tefachim high as the minimum height. But how wide it is and how thick it is, anything. However, Rabbi Yossi said that it needs to be 3 tefachim. So the name of Shmuel said the halacha is not like Rabbi Yossi. Not in regards to how much brine may be made on Shabbos. There was in the Gemara on Shabbos is a question of may you make a lot of brine, where you're not allowed to make a lot of brine because that's going to be pickling, which is prohibited. But can you make a little bit of brine, which is going to be something you would use for that particular meal? And Rabbi Yossi says you may not make even a little bit. And not in our lechi question as well, in the depth and size of a lechi. So Rav Yosef, who had been ill and forgotten much of his teaching, so Rav Huna Bar Chinna said, indeed, our teacher Rav Yosef, we remember you telling us that the halacha is not like Rabbi Yossi in regards to the brine, the hilmi, but we don't remember you telling us that halacha is not like Rabbi Yossi in regards to lechis. And so he responded, Rabbi Yosef responded, what's the difference? Either way, the majority of the opinion of the Chachamim disagree with him. So what difference is it? Over there, the halacha is not like him, and the same over here. Well, I'm not sure that the halacha is not like Rabbi Yossi in regards to the size of the lechi, because Rabbi Yehuda Hamnasi, the compiler of the Mishnah, agrees with him. And therefore, I think the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. Rav Chumi Masni Hachi. Rav Chumi said actually the teaching in regards to whether the halacha is like him or not is like this. Amar Rav Yehuda Bereider of Shmuel. Rav Yehuda, the son of Shmuel Bar Shelas, said in the name of Rav, Ein halacha Rabbi Yossi. The halacha is not like Rabbi Yossi. Not in the brine and not in lechis. Amalei Amrslon. So they said to they said to Rabbi Yehuda B'Shelas, is that really true that this you said the halacha is not like him? I never said that. In other words, that or he retracted. Amar Rava Lakim Amra. That the truth is, he did say, Gamir Nalemine, and I learned it from him. My time and why did he retract his opinion? Because Rabbi Yossi, generally, if he said an opinion, his reasoning and his proofs were solid. So what is actually the halacha? Go check what people are doing. Lechi is not a new idea. This is every Shabbos we need these. Go check what the people are doing. You'll see that nobody is strict like Rabbi Yossi. You don't need a lechi with the minimum size of 3 tefachim. Any size lechi is going to be valid as long as it's 10 tefachim high. And indeed, that's what people do. Go check. Some say this idea about another question. Somebody drinks water if he's thirsty. You know, the halacha is that if you drink water when you're not thirsty, since the basic element, you don't make a bracha. You make a bracha for drinking other juices or anything else, but when it comes to water, if you're thirsty, you drink, then you make a bracha. So Omer, he says, the bracha beforehand, you say the general bracha, which is Shahakol Ni'emet bless you Hashem, etc. That all was created with your word. Rabbi Tarfon Omer Borei Nefashos Shabbos v'Chesron. Rabbi Tarfon says you say Borei Nefashos, creator of many souls, of life, v'Chesron, and all they're lacking. Al Kol Mashav, all that you created to give life, you are blessed. This is the bracha we say as an after bracha for general foods. Rashi has two versions, whether Rabbi Tarfon is disagreeing and saying that this is the first bracha, this is the bracha before drinking water, or this is the after bracha, and then that would indicate that the first opinion says not only is water so basic an element that you don't say a bracha unless you're thirsty, but even when you're thirsty, after you drink, you don't say the after bracha. That would have been the machlokas here. So two versions. Either way, the halacha is that we say the four bracha shahakol, and if you had enough, then you would drink. Then you would say the after bracha bar and flushes. So Rav Chana asked Abai, "What's the halacha?" Again, this is something that's not an uncommon occurrence. People drinking water happens all the time. Go see what the custom is, and that is the halacha. We now go to Tesvav Amid Aleph, 15a. Itma lechi Amid Me'ela. A lechi that was placed there, but not with the intent of Shabbos. It just happens to be there. You have a 3-foot pole that is leaning against the wall at the opening of the alleyway. Was put there for something else. It was a rake. I don't know what. You just have something there leaning. It was placed there, and it just happens to be there. So Abaye says that works. Rabbi says that this does not work. So if nobody was relying on it before Shabbos, everybody agrees that it doesn't count as a lechi. Nobody thought about that before Shabbos. It has to be at the onset of Shabbos. It's already designated as a lechi. Rather, the machlokas is even though that before Shabbos came about, you knew, look, we need a lechi, and you looked around and say, oh, there happens to be a rake or a stick leaning against the wall. I have a lechi at the opening. Abaye says it counts because already from yesterday you counted, you relied on it. Rabbi says it does not count. Since it wasn't originally placed there with your intent, so therefore it doesn't count as it doesn't count as a lechi. You didn't put it there with his intent. Now, what about this is all if you have a lechi. What about if you actually have a proper wall? And the Gemara at this point thinks that just as there's a disagreement between Abaye and Rava, if there happens to be a lechi in place, a vertical post in place, let's say a branch leaning against the wall, and before Shabbos say, oh, we need a lechi. Oh, look, there's a branch leaning right there. There's a stick against the wall. We'll rely on it. Where Abaye says that counts, and Rava says it does not. The same would be if you actually have a proper barrier. So Tashamat, come and let's hear whether that's true in regards to a proper wall. Somebody makes a sukkah, and it's against the line of trees. And counts the wall of his sukkah as these trees. It's going to be kosher. Now there, obviously, that was there beforehand. He didn't plant the trees there for the sukkah, and yet it counts. So Gemara says, no, actually, maybe that's talking about that he actually planted a wall. So he makes a sukkah in his driveway, and the side of the driveway he plants a bunch of trees, shrubbery, and he says, look, I'm planting this in order to have a wall for my sukkah. So Gemara says, well, then obviously, what would be the problem? Why would it not count as a wall for a sukkah? So Gemara says, we know, we've seen in the Gemara and Shabbos, you're not allowed to use a tree. And it's going to come up a lot in Eruvin as well, in regards to putting your eruv, which we know is a meal, and on a tree, and then you're not allowed to use the tree, so you're not allowed to take it off. Does it count as an eruv? So the halacha is you're not allowed to use a tree because you may come to break a branch off, and that's harvesting. So you're not allowed to make use of a tree. We saw this earlier, that if you have, let's say, a hammock, you're allowed to have a hammock hanging from a hook that's attached to the tree. But you're not allowed to have your hammock hanging from the tree. Well, you can, but you can't use the hammock on Shabbos. But if it's hanging on a hook, then you can use the hammock. So you're not allowed to use a tree. Well, if you make your sukkah out of trees, maybe you're going to lean on the tree or put your coat over a branch, and that's prohibited. Kamash Milan, that we're not concerned about that. That's why the Gemara tells us the halacha is that if you made your wall out of trees, it's fine. But the case is where you intentionally planted it for that. At least the Gemara is trying to make that argument. Tashema, so let's try and prove it from here. If there was a barrier, we were trying to make a barrier around the well. We talked the other day about passe biros, these L-shaped corners that were made at the around the well to create a private space, so that you're allowed to bring the water up from the well, which is a Rishus Hayachid on a Torah level, a private domain, and because it's 10 deep by 4 by 4, and then you bring it up into a public domain, and that's prohibited. So you make these corners, L-shaped corners. But however, if you already have a tree or a fence or a bunch of reeds, each one close enough to the next that there's a lavud, which is that they're each within 3 tefachim, let's say 9 inches. So all this would count as the duma, this L-shaped corner. But so you see that the tree, which is there already, is going to count as a barrier. Maybe there too, it's talking about that the tree was planted with the intent that it'll act as a barrier for the corner around the well. Again, so what's the chiddush? Why would I not think that works? The chiddush that would this statement is there is for the row of reeds, where each one is within 3 tvachim. Like Abaya asked Rabbah whether this works, and we'll see this later in the Gemara. And that's what this halach is coming to teach you, that if you have enough reeds that they are within 3 tvachim of each other, in this row of reeds, it's going to count as a valid barrier. Tashema, so we'll try and prove it from here. You have a tree whose canopy hangs down at the side, and so you have the top of the tree, and then the sides of the tree where the branches and the leaves hang down, and it's sufficiently closed, it's sufficiently dense that it's closed off, that when you're inside near the trunk of the tree, you actually have a top and side. And that would be a valid barrier. Think of, let's say, a weeping willow or other trees like that, where it actually comes down to the ground, and it would be a valid tree. As long as the branches and leaves that come down on the side are within 3 tefachim of the ground, you're allowed to carry beneath there. So you see that is counted as an enclosed space, even though that the tree is just happens to be there that way. Maybe this too is talking about where you planted it for that with that intent. Well, if that's the case, you should be allowed to carry the entire space. Why did Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, say that the maximum space that you're allowed to carry within the canopy and wall of this tree branch or tree branches is up to Beis Asayim, 2,000 amma, which square, which is an enormous tree. Maybe a sycamore could have such a canopy, but that size canopy is going to be the max. The Gemara says the reason is, and we'll see much of this, that even though we know that anything that has 3 barriers, 3 walls, counts as a Torah level enclosed space, and therefore is going to be a private domain, and therefore inside this tree canopy and wall, it also should count as enclosed in a private space. But the Gemara, the halacha makes a distinction between something that's enclosed for dwelling, for living, where there, regardless of the size, you can carry within there, and distinguishes between that and something that's quasi-public space, such as a storage area, or this. It's made for watching an open field. Nobody lives in such a space. It's not living quarters. It's a suyla avira. It's made for just to be able to watch an open ear, right? Open space, and therefore it's not made as living space. And the maximum for such a kind of space is 70 by 70 plus a little bit, amma, which is a base society.
So we're getting into carpets now?
No, we're not going to get into that, but that is one example.
But it's a carpet.
Yeah, that is one example, which is like a storage area for wood behind the house, etc. Called a carpet. But there are many such areas that are really not, that concept is, it's not enclosed for dwelling. It's enclosed for guarding or storage, etc. I saw somebody chatted a question. What was the question?
So my question was, when it comes to the designation, does it have to happen twice? Once when the wall or the post or the whatever was created, and then also again at the beginning of Shabbos?
No.
Or
the designation here at the beginning of Shabbos is natural. It's in a space that automatically it's going to be designated. So therefore, according to Rava, he says it doesn't count. The designation at the beginning of Shabbos is there already. There's a post right at the beginning of the alleyway. There's a tree at the side of your sukkah. There's a completely dense tree around you. So that is a natural designation. Before Shabbos comes in, I can carry in here. Whoa, look around, it's great. Rava says that won't count. Therefore, the Gemara won't count for a lechi, for a vertical post. The Gemara is trying to say that it also wouldn't count for an actual barrier, for an actual wall. And therefore, the Gemara keeps on asking these questions. Why? If I have a natural wall, it'll work, as we see in all these cases. And there, the Gemara says, no, it has to be that way back when my intention in planting it was so that I have this barrier. And the Gemara is going to continue trying that, and then ultimately the Gemara is going to say, no, that's not true. For a barrier, if there's a barrier, there's a barrier. And before Shabbos, there was a barrier, that's going to be good. Actually, we'll see some halachas where I can actually make a barrier on Shabbos. But if there's a barrier there before Shabbos, for sure, it's okay. Ultimately. But right now, the Gemara is thinking that it's true. Rava's statement in regards to the post at the side of the side of the opening of the mavui of the alleyway would be true for an actual barrier as well, and that's what the Gemara is trying to say. So Tashema Shabbos, Shabbos Betel Shugavay Asar. When somebody begins their Shabbos, wherever they are, that's their space for Shabbos. They're not allowed to go 2,000 amma beyond their space. If you're camping alone, so that's your space. If you're in the city, it's 2,000 amma outside the city. So somebody is on a tail, on a hillside, a mound that's at least 10 tefachim high. That becomes his space. As long as this space is at least 4 amos, let's say 6 feet, up until Beis Asayim, up until let's say 70 by 70, 2,000 amma. Or if he's in a ditch that's at least 10 tefachim deep, anywhere from anywhere from 4 amma until 2,000 amma. V'kama katsura, or he's in a partially harvested field, so all of the stalks are cut down in one area, in one patch. So the bulb area is where he's staying, but he's surrounded by existing stalks, which constitute his barrier for Shabbos. And he's surrounded by still standing stalks. He can walk the entire area and beyond it, 2,000 amma. So within that space, his space, because it's enclosed, it'll count as his space from, as long as it's up to 2,000 amma, up until a square amma, until 70 by 70. So this patch that has already been harvested is 70 by 70. And it'll count as his entire space. And then he has 2,000 amma outside of that. So total space that he can go is 2,070 amma. Now, this harvest obviously was not placed there so that he can make Shabbos and have barriers, right? It was harvested partially because that's where the farmer got up to. But but the walls that exist now were planted there for wheat, for corn, whatever it may be. And if you're going to tell me here too, maybe he planted it so that he has a barrier. Okay, perhaps you can say that for the harvest. Elotel veneka, but a ditch, you can't say that. A mound, all that was. It's not natural. We're talking about specifically where it was dug out for him, and it's 70 by 70 deep, and it doesn't really. None of this is really fitting. So the Gemara retracts and says, on all of these brises, we're going to say that's not true. Of course, when you actually have a wall, that wall is going to count as a valid barrier, regardless of whether it's there on its own and you're just utilizing it, or whether you put it there with the intent of Shabbos, because it's an actual barrier. But the Hava Mechitza counts as a wall. But only in regards to this reminder at the side of the alley, at the entranceway, that's where there's a difference. Because Abaya says, actually, it's not only there as a reminder, it's there as an actual wall. You have 3 walls in your alleyway, and this vertical post counts as the beginnings, the minute amount of the 4th wall, and that's going to count as a valid wall. And just like walls don't require intent in your putting it there, as long as it's there, it counts as a barrier. So too the lechi. So therefore, regardless, it's going to be okay. As long as before Shabbos you look at it and say, oh, there's my lechi, there's my vertical post, it's going to be good, because that's true for walls as well. However, Rava already told us that the lechi, the vertical post at the side of the opening of the alleyway of the mavoi, is going to be a reminder. Up until here, you can carry, don't carry beyond there. This is a private domain, that's a public domain. It's a reminder. If you intentionally put it there, that's a reminder. But if there happens to be something leaning against the wall, that looks like a forgotten item. It doesn't look like a reminder. You didn't put it there, so it doesn't act as a reminder, and it's going to be invalid. Tashma, let's prove from here. Avnei geder hayetzes min hageder. You
said it doesn't look like it, but I mean, if you took a rake and there was a rake there, he said, oh, okay, and on Shabbos he said, oh yeah, that's the lechi. So that doesn't work. But if he took a rake and stuck it there, you're saying that would be a lechi, even though it doesn't look like a lechi.
Correct, but there it is, because you actually did so it acts as a reminder, because you purposefully put it. You had intent when you put it there. But if you didn't have intent, and it just was, happens to be there, that's not going to act as a good reminder.
But
so
I mean,
we're going to try.
But even though, I mean, you're saying this doesn't look like a reminder. I'm saying it could look like a reminder if he had intent. So what's the difference? It's not a matter of what it looks like. It's just a matter of his intent.
That is correct. It doesn't matter so much what it looks like. But the main point is when you act, when you put something there intentionally, that acts as a reminder. When you don't, when it just happens to be there, it doesn't act as a reminder. So we're going to try and prove it from this wall. So there's when they built the wall on the at the opening of the alleyway. So they have bricks laid along the wall, and because bricks are laid one half on top of the other, so there's always some protrusions. And so the bricklayer, when he did so, left its this unfinished look of a brick sticking out and a brick in and a brick out and a brick in, and the gap between each one of the bricks are less than 3 tefachim, let's say 9 inches. So now you have a virtual because less than 3 tefachim counts as enclosed halachically. So you now have, besides for the wall, you have this virtual lechi there, and that'll count. Ain't tzarich lechi acher, so you don't need another lechi there. Those protruding bricks count as your lechi. Shlosha tzarich lechi acher, and if you have three, then more than three, then it doesn't count because it's not considered enclosed. In any case, that's something that wasn't put there intentionally. The Gemara is assuming, and yet it counts as a lechi. So it seems to prove Abaya's point. The Gemara says, no, what the Gemara is talking about is where it was intentionally left that way for the lechi. When the builders built it, they said, all right, we have to cut these off. And you said, wait, leave them. We want these as a lechi. Well, if you put them as a lechi, then obviously, maybe it's there for future construction or to be able to deconstruct it. That's why it was left that way and not for the lechi. Kamash Malan, that tells us that you can rely on it since you intentionally put it there to begin with. Tashama, the Tana Rechia Krisel should see the Echakanas Mechaveroi. We saw this halacha earlier, that if you have a wall and let's say the entire wall around the alleyway is 2 tefachim thick. It's a thick wall, 2 tefachim, which is, let's say, 6 inches. So it's a half-foot wall thick all around the mavui, and the last bit is actually thinner. It's only 1 tefach. So the last, let's say, 10 feet of wall near the opening is smaller, is thinner. So regardless of whether it's smooth on the inside, it's flush on the inside, and on the outside is where it becomes narrower. Or the other way around, where it's flush on the outside, but the inside it becomes narrower, and so therefore you can see it on the inside. Either way, this area that is a thinner wall, since it's different, it's going to count as your lechi, as your vertical post. Now that's assuming that the Gemara is assuming that that's there by happenstance. It's not intentionally made that way. The Gemara says no. Rav is going to say that was made intentionally as your lechi. That's why they made it thinner, and that's why it counts. Well, then why would we think it wouldn't count? The chiddush over here is not that it counts as a lechi. The chiddush is that even though you can't see it on the inside because it's flush, the wall on the inside all looks the same, and it's only thinner on the outside. Nevertheless, it'll count as a lechi, as we saw this great discussion earlier already, whether you have to be able to see it from the inside of the alleyway or it's valid even if you see it on the outside. Tashema, the Rabbi Yasabahumavoy. Let's prove it from this idea, from this story, where Rav was sitting in an alleyway, and it had a lechi and it had a vertical post. And Rav Huna was sitting with him. Amalei l'shamei. He said to his servant, "Go bring some water for our guest." But while he was coming back with the water, the lechi at the opening of the alleyway had fallen off. So he showed him by his hand, "Stop, wait where you are. You can't carry anymore." So Rav Huna was the guest, said, "Can't you rely on that tree that's right by the opening?" Amar, he said, it seems like you never got the clear understanding of this halacha. Did you, before Shabbos, rely on this tree? Even Abaya says, before Shabbos, you have to have relied on the tree. And you didn't, because we had a lechi there, so you never relied on the tree. And seemingly the reasoning is only on account of that he didn't rely on the tree before Shabbos, but had he relied on the tree before Shabbos, it would have worked even as a lechi. It would work as a vertical post, not only as a wall. So that maybe Abaya Rava were disagreeing when you never relied on it before Shabbos. But if you relied on it before Shabbos, regardless of whether you put it there intentionally or it happens to be there, it'll count. The Gemara says, no, that doesn't seem right either. There was a porch that was off in front of the alleyway. So imagine you have an alleyway, and the house that's in front of the alleyway, not in the alleyway, has a porch that comes up close to the alleyway opening, and one of the support beams of that porch are right at the opening of the alleyway, and you say, oh, so we can just rely on that as a lechi, as your vertical post. Now, that Abai and Rava, for all their years that they were in leadership, disagreed over whether or not that counted as a lechi for the alleyway. So you see that Rava, even though it was there before Shabbos, since it wasn't intentionally put there as a lechi, Rava says it doesn't count as a reminder and it wouldn't be valid. And that's indeed where the machlokas is. The Mishnah says, you can make a lechi out of anything. Even if it's a live being. Rabbi Meir says, no, you cannot make a lechi out of a living thing. Similarly, the halacha is that anything you cover a grave with, whether it's the casket or the grave, machlekas, whatever the concept of golel is, whatever you place there is going to be tamei like the primary tumah. So now we turn to 15b, Tesvav on the base, and even a living thing would be tamei. But Rameya says no, a living thing does not count as a golel, as a cover. Similarly, you can write a get on a living thing and hand it to and hand it over, and that will count as a get. Rabbi Yossi Glili posted. Rabbi Yossi says no, it doesn't count as a valid get on a living thing. So Tanya, the Gemara says, anything that is a living thing cannot be made as a barrier for Shabbos, not as a wall for a sukkah, not as a lechi vertical post for your alleyway, not as the L-shaped corners for your well, and also not as a cover for a grave. It doesn't count. It's a living thing. And Rabbi Yossi Glili adds to Rabbi Meir and says that you also cannot write a get on it. My time in Rabbi Yossi Glili. What's the basis for this? In this week's parsha, we learned sefer. To give a get, you have to write a sefer, seemingly a book. Eliela sefer. So perhaps it's only if it's on a scroll. Minayin, the rabbis called over. How do you know they can write it on anything? Tamalim of a kasavla. It says, and he will write for her any type of writing. Nikol makar. Imke matam sefer. So why did the Torah say sefer has to be on a scroll? Lo malacha, to tell you. Ma sefer damashi yeshbur v'achayim. Just a sefer is something that has a life in it. Ve'ena ochel. It's not food. So too, everything else would have to be that it's not a living thing. But if it is a living thing, it would not count. And the Rabbanan say miksiv basefer. They say write it in a scroll, in a book. Sefer ksiv. It says sefer. Now the Hebrew word for sefer can mean also sipur, a story. Write it. Write the occurrence. Right, with this scroll, with this writing, we're going to affect divorce, and you're free to marry, etc. When the Rabbanan say what is, and he shall write to her, which Rabbi Yossi says means that it has to be on a non-living thing. What does he learn from there? That's to tell you that writing affects divorce. Money does not affect divorce. Whereas money affects kiddushin, affects marriage. Perhaps it'll also affect divorce. I may have thought since the Torah juxtaposes the marriage with the divorce. So ma havaya b'kesef, just as kiddushin is affected by money, by value. So giving a ring, af yitzia b'kesef, so too giving a money would also affect kiddushin. So giving a ring, here's your divorce ring, and that would work. Kamash Malan. That's why it says no. You can only affect kiddushin, divorce, gerushin by writing. Rabbi Yosef Glili has Svarim and only. And how does Rabbi Yosef Glili know this? Nafkila Misefer Krisus. He learns that from it says that it is the book of cutting off, meaning divorce. Sefer Kursa and Avacha Kursa, only a book. The scroll can create the divorce and nothing else. But the Chachamim, the majority, say no, that you need it for a different teaching. That it has to be that it's a conclusive separation, divorce, and not that there's some other. He's holding some commitments over her. The Tanya, as we learned, here's your divorce, but it only shall affect divorce on the condition that you don't drink wine. So for the rest of her life, she's bound to him. Or that on the condition you never go to your father's house. That doesn't count as a cut off because she's still bound to him. However, if there's a time limit, as long as you don't drink wine for 30 days, so then it's going to be a good divorce because actually there is a complete separation. Harezu krisis, Rabbi Yosef Glili nafkale, and Rabbi Yosef Glili learns this mikares krisis. He says that you separate. The word has krisus, which is the verb of cutting off. So you can separate it to the noun and the verb, sort of. The kares krisis, Rabbanan kares krisis darshi, and the Rabbanan don't make such a drash of learning two things from the one word just because you can separate it from the plural to the singular, etc. Okay, tomorrow we'll continue with the Mishnah of barriers in a campsite. Meshikoach.